Hey guys, quick note before we jump into the podcast. Normally I'll talk about my favorite part of the podcast at the beginning of it to give you a little taste of what you're getting. What I wanted to do was first of all just say thank you so much for clicking on the video. I'm going to be titling it something a little controversial, so your curiosity is appreciated. But what I'd ask is for you to take the time to listen through this honestly long conversation that I'm leaving pretty much unedited to get to know this controversial and this unpopular opinion of this man and how I really think he approached it in a really respectful way. There was some times that I was like, oh, maybe I should like cut this part out or cut that part out, but I think it's worth hearing all of the blurps and the rants and the moments. So if you'd like to take a couple of different days and listen to sections of this podcast, this is something I'd love to hear a lot of your guys' opinions on as filmmakers, as well as some opinions on the film itself. I think he did an amazing job creating his short film. And I think that I'd love for him to have some feedback from the film community, positive or negative. He may regret me saying that, but hopefully he doesn't.
I regret you saying that.
Good. All right. Welcome back to the CrewCoffee podcast. This is the podcast all about how building people around you helps you become a better filmmaker, as well as grow your filmmaking career. Today, I'm talking to a close personal friend of mine, Max Wilmont. He's probably one of the most eligible bachelors in the entire country, as well as an excellent filmmaker, and not only a filmmaker, but a doctor of sorts, you could say.
Not quite. But.
Not quite. Max is a excellent director, and he's done several different short films. And he was actually one of the first people I met when moving to Atlanta. He's been an inspiring example of somebody who has really taught me how to value story as well as your personal worldview whenever pursuing stories. So I'm really excited to get to know Max a little bit better and hear about how his journey as a filmmaker can help you grow as well. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for that. Those are some big shoes to fill.
I know. I need to stop doing that. I just have high opinions of people. I know. Well, no, Max, I'm really excited to talk to you. I'd love to give you the opportunity to share who you think you are and what exactly you do in the film industry.
Yes. So, who do I think I am? That is a good question. Yeah, so I am like you said, we met 2017?
2017.
Yeah, 2017. All right. So and we met as many indie filmmakers do in the Atlanta world through the Thunderdome.
Yes.
And we just kind of formed a bond between you, me, and your brother Ben.
Yeah.
And ended up working on our film Prone to Wonder. And so, but I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself.
You're so good.
I just finished up physician assistant school, and by God's grace, am going to hopefully be practicing as that soon. But then I also have a passion for filmmaking and storytelling in that capacity. So I enjoy writing and directing and really just being on set. I have been able to help you, Josh, with some film work, and that's been super awesome. Love collaborating, from weddings to helping AD on your short last year. And I just love being on set, so in whatever capacity I can, but my goals have always been to write and direct and produce in some capacity.
I love that. And it's fun to think about the fact that you're not only a filmmaker and how that kind of like affects your view on the industry, but you still have a really, like, out of a lot of filmmakers that I know, I feel like you have an actual passion for filmmaking. And you're not 100% in filmmaking. Like, I tease you all the time. Like, when are you going to stop going to that lame physician's assistant school? That's a dead end. which is exactly
No, there's no future in it.
there's no money in that medical stuff. But you really like you're both passionate about the medical industry as well as you are about filmmaking. And I'm curious to know what kind of like keeps you passionate about filmmaking.
That's a good question. I think it's honestly been like an interesting road, interesting journey, because I feel like my life in filmmaking and just really life in general has been such like an ebb and flow, like roller coaster ride, in terms of like even how I feel about the things that I'm pursuing. So like especially in college, because I did go to I majored in film from Georgia State University, and kind of went that route, and I really did enjoy doing that kind of doing that I guess traditional route, and I felt like I learned a ton, more so the theory behind film, I think, more so than actual production, which was another interesting side story. But so like even in there, even in school, I was always kind of like, well, is this really, I don't know, is this for me? Is this really what I want to do? Do I feel like this is what the Lord is calling me to? And even, I still go through that, but it's been really cool to see how, I would say providentially, the life just has kind of unfolded, and I've been able to be put into situations where I'm surrounded by people who are super passionate about both medicine and film.
Yeah.
And then that kind of in turn influences me, and it like ignites a fire in me. And then I see, yeah, I mean, it's almost just kind of like a cycle. You could say like a vicious cycle, but in this case, I think it's a really unique and I don't know what the right word is. A cool cycle, I'll say. I don't know, for lack of better words.
Yeah.
That it's just been, it's just been really cool to see. I don't know what the future holds, but it's been cool to see where the Lord has brought me thus far, and what He's going to continue to do.
That's really cool. And I love to say, like, not only are you passionate about films, but you probably make more films than most filmmakers who are not dual career actually make. Like you've been on more sets even at times. Like there's a lot of people who are passionate about filmmaking and don't get on film sets. And go ahead.
I think that goes back to just, again, the Lord really has provided like a lot of really cool opportunities, that I don't know. It's just, it's not, I mean, it's things that I've kind of pursued, but even in pursuing it, things don't always work out. And so I feel very grateful to, like friendship with you, like goes beyond filmmaking, of course, but we've gotten to work on some pretty cool things together. Even just like taking that road trip to Florida to do, to shoot the wedding. That was awesome. So yeah, I mean, and again, like I joked earlier, but truly like Isaac Dietz over at the Thunderdome, that's been just a excellent way to branch out and just get to know people in the indie film world, the Atlanta indie film world. And it's just been, I've been very grateful for these opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny to say, like, I've the Thunderdome has come up 2 or 3 times on the podcast, but every time that it's been talked about, it's been like, yeah, this thing that we're not going to talk about because it's getting too popular. Which I love it. I'm actually going to be interviewing the owner of the of the Thunderdome in a couple of days here, so I'm really excited for that. So stay tuned. I won't talk too much about it. I'll let him tell you all about it. But for real, it's in briefness, it was a really cool start for me to get an idea of what it was like to do films with people and to put people over film. And from that, to really start to grow my understanding and ability to be passionate about film because I put people over film.
Mm.
And I think that's been like a really cool thing that I think you've exemplified. And it's also not stopped you from being a good filmmaker. And I'll get into that later, but I'd love to kind of get to know a little bit more about your experience making the film that we kind of met on all those years ago. And I talked with the cinematographer a couple of days ago, and we joked about the fact that I think you and I met talk
Yeah.
over coffee talking about this film. And we were talking with my brother, and we were going to come out as producers, and I was going to be the cinematographer.
I knew this is where it was going.
Yeah. And I was not the cinematographer. I'm not bitter about that at all. It was actually probably the best thing because it was like such a funny experience. And I told Chad, I was like, I was basically who I was on set. I was I was Steve Jobs' little brother who they let touch everything. I wasn't even, I mean, I was there and I was helpful, but it was funny to think about like, I really like, I was trying to pretend to be the DP and let Chad be the cam op. Chad was 100% like everything valuable, which was awesome. But I think it
You
was
were everything valuable as well.
yeah. It was just it's such a funny memory to think like that was the first film that I'd really worked on here in Atlanta, and I think it really started to shape for me that like I don't have to be the star for a film to be good. Like I don't have
Mm.
to be involved in a film and be the guy for that film to be really really good. And I think that I can be helpful on a set and be proud of the film that we made. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about the short film that you made in 2017.
Yeah, so the film is called Prone to Wonder, and basically it's a story about a girl who goes through a tragedy and tries to escape from the said tragedy by going on the Appalachian Trail. I'm not sure I say Appalachian, but there's debate in that.
You're
Um,
good.
and so she, in the course of being a through hiker on this trail, she kind of discovers that maybe escaping is not the best way to deal with the problem. So it was very close to my heart. It was born out of a situation. I did not go through the same tragedy that's portrayed in the film, thankfully, but something on a lesser scale, but similar enough to kind of invoke this story. And really, even before that turn of events happened, uh, I kind of had um, almost like a ghost of an idea that I really wanted to pursue, and just didn't really have like a solid story for it. And then this situation happened, and and from there, got after that happened. Still, the story wasn't completely formulated in my head. But then we I was involved in doing camera work with my church, and we were doing this 48-hour film festival, and one of our mutual friends, Sean Franklin, came on board on that project, and we were just kind of we were working on that 48-hour project, and well, we had some downtime at some point, and we were talking, and we just kind of started talking about how we really wanted to do a project, and just like do it, because we'd both been in situations where we talk about these projects and these ideas and these stories, and you're like, oh, that'd be so cool, and let's do it. And then you know what happens, everything goes to shambles, and or it doesn't even go to shambles, it just doesn't even start. um, it stops at the idea. And so we were both like, we just really want to do something, we just really want to like work on something cool, and complete it. And in the midst of that also, we were both, and I wouldn't say that I'm past this, that's something we can get into more, but like we both had the idea, had the desire to kind of figure out what it means to either, whatever you want to put it, make Christian films or be Christians in the filmmaking world, however you want to say it, just what that means and what
Yeah.
kind of story, how to tell really good stories, or meaningful stories, I guess you could say, and what what that looks like, especially just with just what that whole process looks like. So we embarked on this journey of Sean is like a writer by trade, and we kind of just started brainstorming, going through this, and we went through several iterations of a script, and then our buddy Dan Holmes kind of came on board as a kind of advisor, and he had this idea of like, we had this script that centered around this girl, but it had to do more with like a race, and he gave the idea. He was like, why don't you just do what if she was on like hiking the Appalachian Trail? And we were like, wow, that's actually very intriguing. So we kind of reshaped the story based on that. And that whole process was probably a year and a half, I think, from like us initially talking to kind of teasing out ideas to writing the script to refining the script and everything. And that was a really good process because it was helpful for both of us, just to kind of go through, one, to like work together and to co-write, was a really interesting process, and there was challenges, but it was like I enjoyed it and I would like to do it again,
That's interesting.
because it like really, it gives you just a different perspective, because when you're and I like writing by myself as well, and there's certain advantages of that, but it's really cool to get somebody, like, to have built within the process a second opinion. There's always going to be a second opinion.
Yeah. And if you
And
mind
so
if I kind of comment in on that in that moment,
yeah.
I find it really interesting. Like, there's this idea in some of the scripts that we feel like we need to be so proud of, that we need to be the author and the maker and everything perfect within the story, or that this is my film, this is my story. And you're talking about an experience where this was your like desire to create something, and you kind of went along, even not only on the set day did you start to develop these connections with people, but even before it was ever considered to be an actual film, you started to give away some of the ownership and some of like, I want to be a star, and started to explore the actual possibilities for the script. And from that, you got like the fullness of the story. Now, I think it's really interesting, and there's going to be a theme that I don't think is wrong. It's just intriguing and worth talking about. That process took a year of like trying and teasing and playing and considering. And I think it's going to be fun to talk about that in contrast to some of your more recent ideas. But like, I think a lot of times we expect us to have like this one idea and it's going to be perfect and I have to do it. And like, and I've known for myself, like, I think that the first idea is a lot of times the best idea, but often it's the development of that idea into implementation that we actually end up finding what we were looking for at the beginning. But again, I digress. I'd love to hear kind of what were some of the next steps in that process as you moved forward.
Yeah. And I'll comment on that just real quick.
Please.
Just that, like, that is one of, I think, the coolest things about filmmaking is that's one of my favorite things, is seeing the evolution of a story and how it starts off as one thing. And by the end, it's usually, at least how I've noticed it, it's usually, completely different, and there's elements of it that are the same, and you obviously have a vision and you're trying to attain to that, but it's so cool to see how it changes over time and how oftentimes the end product is a lot better than what I had envisioned, anticipated, and I think that for me, I've noticed that comes through collaboration, and it's not what you had said, something that made me think of, giving away ownership and everything. That's something that I struggle with. Like, when I first started, like, playing around with making short films when I was a kid with my brother. Like, I always envisioned, like, I want to be the DP, I want to direct, I want to edit, I want to write, I want to do all these things, because, and I won't say that that's completely gone. I still have to like kind of struggle with like, well, it's this idea of ownership. Is that like the most important thing? And like, pridefully, sometimes that is the most important thing for me.
Yeah.
it's definitely definitely a struggle, but it's really cool to see how it usually ends up being so much better, the more people, just when you collaborate. And I've found that to be very intriguing in the process.
That's so cool.
So back to, I'm sorry, you said, where were we?
No, you're so good. I was just I love that thought, and it's, I think it's really important, and I'm curious to know, like, how did the rest of the actual project play out after you wrote it?
Yeah. So let's see, we finished well, actually, that's another kind of lesson that we can go into at
Please.
another point. But we continued refining the script. I mean, pretty much up until
The last day.
like even on the, like, I think, no, we may not have made corrections like the night before, but it was pretty close. I mean, like, yeah, the day, 2 days, 3 days, it was up to the production.
Yeah.
Which is cool, but definitely learned that that's not always the best way to go about it.
It had
It
some
was,
interesting repercussions with the producer.
yeah, yeah, it did. Um, Nothing terrible at all, but it just, I think it ended up making, at times it made things harder. And that was this whole the whole this film was really my film school, I kind of call it. You hear it talked about with, the big directors that,
Yeah, your
or
second film school, right?
yes, yeah. Film school number one was the degree film school, and that taught me one thing, and this taught me the practical. That was
Yeah.
theory. This, like, what does it actually mean to make a film? Not that I didn't make anything, at Georgia State, but it was not. This was the biggest thing that I had worked on, and it's not even like, it's not huge. It was just the biggest thing that I had personally, like, directed. And it was such a great experience because all those things, even through the mistakes and everything, I mean, that's what makes you learn. And so we were doing the script, and then it was just really cool to also see how the crew and everybody came together. So you and Ben got on board, and then Chad, a longtime friend, got on board. Our lead actress, Katie Tolka at the time.
Katie freaking Tolka.
Yes, she's now married and is Catherine Jameson. And so I had known her from church years back. Was never like super close with her, but there was like a couple times where I just kept on running. I used to work at Target, and we just would randomly run into each other, and found out that she was involved in film. She was acting and everything like that, and we kind of got on the subject of this short film. She was like, "Send it my way. I'd love to take a look at it." And so sent it, and she was like very interested in being the lead, and she gave us an audition tape, and it was really good. Really, really ended up being exactly. I mean, I'm so grateful for her involvement because she bore a pretty heavy burden, both in terms of the story, and to just being very patient in me learning how to direct.
Yes.
And she did an incredible job, and
She was an absolute star on the production. Like,
yeah, she was.
just beyond, like, there were so many little pieces throughout the entire film that I think were like just like complete surprises for me. And I think that Katie was one of those like cream of the crops where it was just like, we have good cam ops, we have good crew, we have a good script, and then we just had a crazy good star.
Yeah, I know. She like literally carried the weight of the film, and like actually quite literally, because she had a heavy backpack on
the entire time.
Yeah. But then, yeah, and then we got Audrey Moore, and she was perfect for the role. There was our kids, Gabriel Colwell and Nicholas Tate, and then Doug Stroop came on as Nicholas's father. And so the whole cast was great. And then again, through the Thunderdome, got some people on board like you and Josh Estes and Kyle Jenkins, and then Katie had given us the name of her friend Vivian Clifton, who helped with wardrobe and everything. And it's just also, and there's like several other people that were on board that Sarah aren't, and then my brother Jack, and then even a buddy of mine came out and helped, Ben Phillips.
Yep.
So there was just a lot of different people involved, and
it's funny to think how like all these different names came from, like some of those connections were my friends, some of them were your friends, and all of these different like flavors and different like characters and different like pieces to the puzzle really played a big part of the picture of like what the film ended up being. I think that if different people had been involved, so many different pieces of the film would have been just completely different. And there's a big conversation about what that does and then what it looks like in contrast to some of the more recent films you've done. But it's funny to think about, like, we think about how like our lives are affected by the hellos and the goodbyes that we say. And our films are doubly affected by every hello that you bring onto set. It's just massive, massive changes depending on even to the simplicity of like, what jokes do you make on the set? And there's a whole conversation about my terrible character on that set, but we'll continue.
Oh, well, again, I mean, to your point, like it was really cool to see how the Lord brought all these different people, like even the main location that we used, a buddy of mine who's also involved in film, Thorne Winter, he hooked us up with his family's property. And then even like there was somebody who I actually had never met in person, whose name is Alicia Kelly, and she like helped with finding, like she kind of helped with some of the casting. And yeah, there's just so many like different cool connections that are like that all came together. And I'll just kind of say, just because it's, a part of, for me, it's the central part of the process and hopefully the end product. But like it was, I think prayer is like a huge part of it. And just seeing how the Lord answers prayer and provides like the people and the resources, even to the point of like my friend donating some money to it, to the production, was like a huge, that was a huge deal. So.
And you see throughout the entire film, there was a lot of like emotional investment, like mental investment, a lot of like time investment into the film. And I think that showed in so many different pieces, even to the point whenever we finally finished the film, and there's a lot of conversation about the in-between parts of the film. There was quite a bit of people that came to the premiere. There's probably about 30 to 40 people that came and watched this short film premiere. And it was intriguing to see how that affected the overall process of the growth of the film. And there's positives and negatives, and then critiques as well as praises. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, one of the things I kind of wanted to address, and I think this is just funny, you could praise me to the end of the wind. You're very bad at telling me I'm bad. But one of the things I learned on that set was like how little respect I had for the art of filmmaking. And I think I didn't realize that until afterwards, because there was a scene where the actress was really trying to get into character and needed the room and the respect. And I think I made a joke to one of the other characters, and then I saw her in that moment and I was like, man, I don't care. Like, I don't care if she needs this moment to be serious so that she can get into her character. And it was a challenging moment for me because there was about 3 or 4 different moments throughout that entire experience. And I really learned on that set what it meant to not respect the set. and it was funny to look at that experience to some of our more recent ones. Like for me to step in and say, like, I want to honor your set. And not to move too far, unless you'd like to say more about the current film, there are some interesting ideas to the long and interesting process of this 23-minute, was it 19 minutes at the final edit?
Yeah, about 19.
Yeah, and I'd love to jump into like a lot of the post-production process with you and Chad, the editor and cinematographer, because there's 1,000 stories about this film. And to briefly mention, there was a moment where all the audio or all the second halves of the audio was lost, and we thought it was completely gone, to where we'd have to ADR it, and then you had to redo the audio, and then you had to record the audio because you could play it in a certain thing, and it was just this like whole thing where at the end of the day, it took you another year to edit it, and maybe even longer. And what's so funny is Katie Toko, now Katie, Catherine Jameson. Catherine Jameson was the lead actress, and she met the man who she's now married to on that set. Like, I was there when they met, and then also
not the set, but like,
well, that I was there that week. It was after the set.
Okay.
And it was hilarious to see that. And then the day that you finished the film, you text me and I called you because I was on my way to film her wedding. Oh, yeah. I was like, you got her a wedding gift? It was just such an interesting experience to this long like process where the film ended up being honestly something really magnificent. And I'd love to go into kind of like the heart behind like the topic was intriguing and difficult. And I think it's really interesting to watch is like your personal experience played into the experience of the film, but also it played into this, I'd say 3-year process of creating this 19-minute, 20-minute short film. And,
right. Yeah.
And it really showed in so many different ways. Before we get too deep into that, I'd love to kind of shout your praises. After that film, I had you come on and work on a project with me that was very similar. It was a dream project. Everything was great about it. I put all of these hopes into it, and had you come on in AD, and I really enjoyed directing that project. And I think the visuals were really interesting. But on that set, you were the most respectful, most like genuine person on set, wanting to make sure that everything went really well. And you were like extremely attentive to make sure that I, as a director, had the ability to focus, was on time, and made sure that you knew that like what I thought mattered and how I felt mattered. And I think it was such an intriguing contrast because there were moments that I'm sure that like you appreciated me on set with your first short. But I think looking at your character versus mine between those two experiences, I learned so much how to do it the right way. Like to the point where now I say like, who do I want on set? I want Max on set because you show the set what it's like to be like an A-team player and to make everybody else on set feel amazing. And it was really intriguing to watch that process because there's plenty of reasons why you could appreciate me for the previous film. Like you and I were very involved in after the script was written, thinking about the motivation and then the application of the script in a way that was a little bit more subtle, and even in the editing process, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Wait, no, you're so good. I left the blank moment there.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I will say thank you. Thank you for saying that. That's that means a lot, and I do appreciate. I do really take that to heart and appreciate that because it was really cool to kind of come on set, and like I had never AD'd before when you had asked me about that, and so it was just kind of an interesting process, and we briefed about like things that went well, things that could be improved in like even the process of ADing. So it was just like a really cool experience. Again, I like being on set, and so getting to learn that. I think there's like a inner, like he kind of takes it to well, I don't know. There's an interview that I heard with David Fincher where he talks about how he wanted to know every role on set so that he can better direct and know how to push his crew members so that like I think I haven't listened to like a ton of interviews with him, but it sounds like from one of his I don't know, pet peeves or motivations is to avoid laziness, and he really tries hard to or he really wanted to know every role on set so that like if somebody's kind of slacking off or something, say like I know that you can do more, I know that this can be pushed further. That's
really interesting.
Yeah, so I always thought that was interesting. I don't know if that's necessarily my motivation. I just think that's a really good way to approach like learning the different roles. Is like how can I know what's going on so that we can all contribute to again collaborate and make a better product.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's fun to see that in each part of the process is like, how do I give this everything that I possibly can? And what's really awesome is there's never been a time that I've had you on set where I'm not like, I want Max on again. And I think a lot of people are in this cycle where they wonder why they're not being asked back on the set, and they're networking and they're being creative and they're doing all of these things, but they're not being super respectful to the craft. Like they're not being exceptional people. And I think that's a lost concept of like, how do I not only like, I'm not trying to stand out because I'm this like attention, like desiring all this attention. I'm not even trying to stand out because I want to like look the most creative or be like, give the best ideas. I want to stand out because I'm the most dedicated to my craft. And I think that that kind of character is what gets you called back onto set, because they're like, that guy's going somewhere. Like that guy's worth being around. Not only that, that guy makes my sets better because not only do I never have a problem, but my sets are only always better, not because he told me what shot I should get or how we should do this better. That's a lot of people think like, man, I need to have my star moment when I give the good idea at the right moment. And then they end up wondering why nobody likes that, because they feel like they're trying to be somebody cool rather than naturally being somebody really cool, which is being amazing on set.
I mean, that's a life lesson, to be honest. I think like, and that's something that I struggle with too, as well, is like, even when you're like, you have like conversations with friends or family members, and maybe you're having like a tough conversation, and you have that desire to like drop that bomb, that truth bomb, or that that whatever it is that's gonna like just completely blow their minds and change their life and change that situation. And sometimes it just doesn't come. And sometimes again, it's just, it's better to listen than it is to be, try to muster up something. And I've definitely failed in that, but try to muster up like the right words when you don't really have the right words.
That's so big. And it's an old thought, but it's a lost thought that like, you're not like, you use the analogy, like, the husband that's doing the extra things, but he's not willing to do what's actually asked of him. I've struggled with this in career. Like I've tried so hard to be exceptional in so many areas. Nobody's asked me to be exceptional. Nobody, not even myself. Like I'm literally just pulling these things because I feel like I'm supposed to, without actually being exceptional in the things that matter. Like to the simplicity of keeping your room clean versus, oh, I'm out there working hard every day, but every time I come home, I feel like I want to cry. Like that's a silly small example, but it's applicable in the sense of what people value on set is not your ability to be the most different. It's by being the most, I think that like, there's this idea that you need to be Fincher on set.
Yeah.
No, you need to be you on set, and in the way that everybody notices that you're the best you. And that's a cliche until you apply it to the idea that means that you have to pick up dirt every day, even if nobody likes it. And it's huge. Like it's a hard concept to learn, and it's something I'm still trying to learn today. It's a
lifelong.
Yeah. So in kind of moving forward, and we'll have time to kind of press back into Prone to Wander, we went through making a couple of films together. I feel like every time that we make a film, it's just you and I goofing off and having too much fun. But you and I have had many conversation about the projects that you work on and the time that you've invested into. And there's a big contrast between this large set, this long process. And then recently you had the opportunity to do, which that project was very, I wouldn't say controversial, but it was very agenda driven, which we talked a lot about how to navigate that in a way that was good. And I feel like I learned a lot. And then I think that you learned a lot, not only because I said some nice words and told you what you should do, but I think you learned a lot because the next film, in my opinion, was a very interesting application of the ideas that we talked about. But I'd love to hear about this recent short film that you just directed. And the first thing I'd love to hear is the contrast of how large it was.
Yeah. So the film that we just finished up and released is called Terminate, but it's term, comma, space, Innate. So like a term, academic term, whatever, pregnancy term for this application, and innate, like we have innate value.
Interesting.
But it's also a play on words with terminate, the word terminate. So let's see. This was a set of, let's see, it was me, Chad Kimbrell, who's our DP and editor, Vivian Clifton, who was wardrobe design and basically production design, set design, set deck, and like emotional support for the actress. And then, so that was the only crew. And then we had, Josh was hopefully supposed to be on, and then something unfortunately came up. I don't say that to like, I don't say that to rub it in. I just, it's like, I really did miss having you on there. And I'm not, again, not like out of
I was really sad to miss that project.
And then even like Sean Franklin was, hopefully, and then he couldn't because of commitments. But
you had a total of how many people on set?
So like it was, let's see, the most people we had on a given day, we shot in basically 2 separate days, was 5 people.
Yeah. And then 3 of those were actors, right?
2 actors.
2 actors per day.
There was 2 actors on one day, 2 actors on the other day.
Yes.
And then, so yeah, it was pretty much it wasn't necessarily by design as much as it was by just the way the circumstances.
The show must go on.
The way the cookie crumbles, if you will.
And it was such a micro crew that you ended up actually booming as the director yourself for the audio.
Yeah, which was which I kind of like had thought about doing for Prone to Wonder, and then I'm really glad I didn't do that. But because it was tough. I mean, thankfully it ended up working out, but for this one, but yeah, that's not ideal. But it's fine because I can, I wasn't really doing a lot holding the mic. I mean, you do kind of have to think about the technical side of like switching directions of the mic and everything like that. But I'm able to just like watch the scene unfold as I'm booming. So it ended up being, and people, I know, like just as an example, because we've mentioned him, like Isaac DPs his own the things that he shoots. Yeah. So I was kind of like, well, why not there be a boom director as well?
That's a new one. But there's an interesting concept about like the areas that you put attention into often have an interesting effect on the film overall. There was some interesting audio elements within the film. It wasn't particularly like heavily audio driven, but it definitely didn't feel like audio was lacking.
Well, I'm glad you say that because I'm definitely not a boom operator by trade or a professional mixer.
And when we contrast the content of this film in the Prone to Wander, which was a large film, we had probably about 20 people on set, probably 10 to 20. I can't exactly remember how many exactly.
Yeah, 10 to 20.
Which is depending on the day.
Like huge, but it's like
it was a lot different.
Yeah, very, very different. Very different.
It's intriguing to watch the experience of both of the sets for a handful of different reasons. And I say this with a lot of love and respect for Prone to Wander. From my knowledge of both films, I liked your most recent film more. And I've told you this before, but it was funny to see, like, and I'm saying this with a lot of respect, nothing demeaning towards the previous film. The project, you wrote it in like a couple of months. You were forced to write it in a couple of months. You shot it in 2 days. You came up with the concept in that period as well. And then you had to edit it by a very, very quick deadline. You had no resources. You had way less money than the last film. Because the last film you spent this was like, you were dedicated to your craft. You were buying Chick-fil-A for everyone.
Well, just the nugget tray, not like
no, you didn't get a nugget tray. You got the chicken wraps for everybody.
Oh, that's right. I forgot
Busted. You were like very, very invested into the film emotionally, like financially, like effort, and then even in the editing process, it was a very long process for the edit, which there's some reasons for that. But it's
about.
really, really intriguing to watch the contrast of like the two films. I think that Prone to Wander very much benefited from the time that was put into it. But I think that a lot of the maturity that you had as a director and a filmmaker really showed in your ability to compress a lot of that time in the next film. And then even to the concept of where one of the biggest things that I feel like we talked about and learned and then may have been implemented, because like to spoil a little bit, the topic of the second film is extremely sensitive. It's over the topic of abortion. It's over the opinions on its morality, and whether you side either way or not, I think is irrelevant to the understanding of his approach to the film, which is this massive amount of respect for the human experience. And I think that that was one of my favorite things when watching the film. And then in many ways you did that in Prone to Wander, but I think there was more of a focus on the human experience and then allowing people to come to their own conclusions. But I'd love to hear from you a little bit about your heart behind the film and then your approach to it.
Yeah, so I don't know if actually I can't remember how much I told you about the process leading up to even like writing the script.
Yeah.
Because it was quite the like the script, the film, I guess the film that we ended up with, that process you could say was a lot more condensed than Prone to Wander. But I would say that the thought process leading up to knowing even what direction to go with a short film may have been just as long, if not longer, than the thought process behind Prone to Wander.
Interesting.
Because it was, so the film, the target, the end audience or goal of the project was, it was my thesis basically for physician assistant school, and we have to complete this research project before we graduate. And so I started PA school in the beginning of 2018, and from that moment we're told that we have this master's project, that's what we call it, that we will have to do by the end, and that's just a known thing that's coming up, a known assignment. And so, we have a lot of time to kind of just be mulling over what topics are interesting, what we might want to pursue in research and all this. And so I had like several ideas, and it to kind of sidestep just a little bit, it's really cool to see, again, I feel like the Lord really led, because there was this inception of an idea that I wanted to do, that I wanted to do something in the project, and I wanted it to be kind of like, some way a teaching tool, something along those lines. But again, just a wisp of an idea. I didn't know how that was going to look, and to see it evolve, again, going back to the process of filmmaking being an evolution, is really cool. But anyway, so eventually I just really wanted to do something on the topic of abortion because it's close to my heart. It's just something that's very relevant in our day and age. And honestly, it was an interesting process to kind of confront my beliefs about it and just kind of see where I stand on it. Not that you can argue that, I don't know, there's lots of different arguments to make, but I kind of wanted to dive deeper into it just because it's something that comes up. It's something that I feel like, being in the medical field and in some capacity, I'm sure we'll confront it continuously in the future. I don't know what field I'm going into, but I think it's going to be an issue that, as long as it's going on, going to be something to confront. And so I wanted to do something along those lines, but again, it didn't really know how to do process of like trying to do research and figure out like what angles to do. And so to make a long story short, I eventually I I was very great or very blessed to have my advisor for this project with the Alexis Moore, Professor Alexis Moore. She's also a PA, and she also has a background in film, so that was really really cool. And so she was all for like incorporating filmmaking into the project. And so we talked a lot, and she was huge help for processing through this film, or processing even through the ideas that I was having. So she challenged me in how I was approaching it, how I was thinking about it, and all these things. So we had some really good in-depth conversations. We decided to do a documentary, and so I was going to do a documentary on alternatives to elective abortion, which is elective just meaning kind of it's a medical, because abortion, just to get like minorly medically technical, abortion in it of itself is actually just a medical term for they call it a demise of a pregnancy before 20 weeks. And so you can have miscarriages and stuff like that. So the medical term of miscarriages is a certain type of abortion. So adding that word elective means that that's what we when we normally hear the word abortion, elective abortion is what we're talking about, meaning that it's a choice to I'll just go ahead and say kill the baby in the womb. So let's see, I'm losing my train of thought. So I wanted to do something along those lines, and we decided to do this documentary where I was going to talk about, or I was going to interview kind of both sides of the argument. A doctor, I was going to try to find somebody who had an abortion and regretted it, somebody who had an abortion and did not regret it, and some people in the medical field, doctors, PA, nurses. And so we started this process and interviewed, I think I actually interviewed about 3 people, but also all the while during the research process I had come across these programs called perinatal palliative care. And perinatal palliative care is basically exists for women and families who their babies are diagnosed while they're still pregnant with a life-limiting condition. So a condition the baby will likely be severely mal-impacted, either through the rest of their life, or they may only live for minutes, hours, days, have like a limited lifespan. And so if the woman still wants to continue carrying the pregnancy to term, there's these programs that come in and basically help you maximize the time that you'll have with the baby. Or the child, if they survive longer than infancy. And so that was super intriguing, and I really wanted to do a documentary and find a woman and a family that was like literally in the middle of that process and follow them through the birth and see all that. But that, for I'm sure obvious reasons, proved to be very difficult to try to find somebody who because of all the legal implications and all this stuff. So ended up interviewing somebody who a woman who had gone through this process, and her baby survived. I'm blanking out now, but I think it was a very short amount of time. I mean, it was a day. It was hours. So I interviewed her, and it was a very, very heart-wrenching story, just about her process. She was given all the options of abortion, and she kind of walked through thought process and through what they had considered, and through all these changes of circumstances, she her and her husband ended up deciding to carry to term. And so their baby, Willow, was born. And while pregnant, Willow was diagnosed with trisomy 18, which is a genetic anomaly. And then also what they call a diaphragmatic hernia, which is where there's like a hole through the diaphragm, which is the to breathe. There's a hole. There was a hole in that, which caused her organs to kind of be pushed up, and so the combination of those were very basically cool. And so that was just like a really cool story to be a witness of, to be kind of brought into that. She was very, the one Brittany, she was very open about her process and the whole situation. And so I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And so from that, then I don't exactly remember when the transition happened, but eventually kind of got to thinking like, why don't we just make like narrative film is my first love, like in the filmmaking. Like I was intrigued by doing the documentary, and I was I do enjoy some documentaries, but scripting and telling a story in a narrative form is like what I really interests me. And so eventually we were kind of like, well, what if we just make this? What if we make Brittany's story? What if we dramatize it and make it into a short film? And that was the birth, pun intended, of
oh my God. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, and like to see where the process of the film started and then ended up, and to see some of those elements of like, this is like, obviously this is a sensitive topic. There's a large majority of filmmakers would even disagree with your opinion about the subject, or where you even come at it from an idea of many medical like experience and things that you believe to be facts. This is a topic that many of your even peers that you're sharing this film with are going to really greatly disagree with you on. And I think that the film that you ended up making, and this is partly what I'd love to spend some of our time focusing on, is your film didn't, and I'm going to be extremely rude to a group of people that I'm a part of. Your film wasn't the movie Unplanned. And I watched that movie, and I know a lot of my friends who loved that movie. And not from any kind of obnoxiousness. I hated that movie. Like, I watched it and I felt gross because I was a part of that group in painting people in this way. Like, they didn't have the respect for people, for individuals to go through an experience. They just said, oh, that guy in the hallway, he's bad. And it was like, come on, like, there's so much more deepness to a story, and you don't even have to paint a villain in this story. There are people with experiences that we want to get to know, and let's respect that. And I feel like your story took a good approach to being able to try and do that. And I think, because we mentioned briefly after you had actually shared the film with your class, that you had wondered if you were too subtle with the film. And after watching it, I mean, I to my apologies, got very passionate and disagreed with you, and shared, like, I think that you took the film, and to give you a brief synopsis of the film, and I'd recommend, I'll link it in the description, is you took a person's experience and you explored that. You didn't explore and say, this is right and this is wrong. You let somebody empathize with a human, with a person's story. And from that, you allowed people to come to their own conclusions. And I think this became very conversational. And we talked about this, about the purpose of a film. Is a film's purpose to be a class? Is even a documentary's purpose to be a class? And I think there's a challenging thought that maybe people have opinions, and you can't change them with facts. But people have experiences that shape the way that they view the world. And I think that you approached a very, very sensitive subject in a way that I personally think was very respectful to the entire conversation as a whole.
Mm.
Because there's so much more complexity to the conversation than even many ideas that you brought up in the film. Somebody might even come in and say that what you did, like what the characters were doing, was cruel, but you can't argue that they had a human experience.
Right.
You can't do that. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the approach of the storytelling overall.
Yeah. I'll try to articulate. It's just a hard subject and process overall.
Yeah.
But it's like, I think one of the people that I did end up interviewing in the process when I thought this was going to be a documentary was a physician assistant who's a friend of mine named Caroline. And she really helped shape, I feel like she helped shape my kind of opinions
Yeah.
on abortion, or because she's very passionate um, about protecting and preserving the lives of these babies. But she was she was on the front lines in terms of, like, she was a provider in women's health. She got patients that wanted her practice did not do abortions, but they would provide referrals. Um, and she had to kind of confront how she was going to handle that, with her beliefs about abortion being wrong, and again, not for the sake there. I mean, we can that's a whole nother podcast or a whole nother topic of, like, the actual debate. But it was really cool to hear how she handled those situations where she basically said, I cannot, in good conscience, the lady, there's a quote, I'm not going to be quoting her directly,
Yeah.
or I'm quoting her, but I don't remember exactly the words that she said. She basically was like, she would say to a patient who may be asking for the referral that, the patient that came in before you, I called her, few week old or month old fetus, a child, a baby. Now you're asking me to, provide the resources to kill that baby, and I cannot, I can't consistently practice, but kind of talking talking out of both sides of my mouth. Um,
Mm.
and so for that reason, I can't give you this referral. And she said that actually her patients appreciated that, like,
Yeah.
appreciate that she was trying to live like
Consistent.
a consistent life, yeah,
Yeah.
and practice medicine in an honorable and consistent way. And that supersedes, there again, kind of almost kind of touching on what you just said, it supersedes opinion and goes to experience. So
Yeah.
um and so she and that was actually one of the ideas that um even Chad had brought up a while back when we were kind of brainstorming, like, because he was part of the process early on,
Yeah.
kind of spitting out ideas, and something that he had brought up was, like, making a film that's not saying, that's not focusing on the wrongs of abortion, and instead kind of elevating life,
Mm.
and elevating the meaning of life, and through some other circumstances, through some other friends and everything. That's a theme of the film, and even how I presented it, like in my final presentation of the film, was this idea of wonder, and how I think one of the reasons why we are at the point where we are in our society, where abortion is and thankfully it has, the numbers have gone down from what it was, but it's still, very, very prevalent. Um, the One of the reasons I think that we're in this spot is because we have lost a sense of wonder of life. And when I say wonder, like this, um, this deep sense of awe.
Mm.
And and that's something that I deal with. Like, I'm not pointing the finger and saying like everybody else has this problem and I've attained to uh, some high level of wonder. I struggle with it on a daily basis to like really to really see, like, I don't know, really like take in the world that we live in, and take in what God has given us, through like creation, and I think that's something that film can do. It can like, and that's something that I kind of researched in this project is film theory about how film can be a means to a means of wonder, a conduit for people to see the world differently. Um, so those are some thoughts, I guess, and uh, we kind of tried to incorporate a lot of those themes into the film, and yeah, I think that's the general gist of it.
So we're gonna hold for 2 seconds, and I only do this because I know you really well. I have to pee so bad. I will be right back. I'm cutting this
Go.
part out, and then I'll just jump in and
I
respond.
keep it in now.
All right, I am so sorry.
No, you're good.
Awesome. Um, and so I'll just jump right back into where we were at.
Yeah.
So,
Can I
oh,
add something as well,
please,
real
please,
quick?
please, please.
Um, One thing that I did learn through this process is I think, even, and again, that kind of goes back to the interview that I referenced with Caroline, the PA. It's just, it's interesting to try and reconcile like having a difference of belief, like a core belief, I would say, about such a topic as this, but still, again, recognizing that, um, that people have these experiences and they're still people. So even though I do think that, um, like I have an opinion, I think abortion is wrong because of all these things, go into right now. Um, that doesn't negate, especially like as a future provider, a medical provider, that I still have to like care, and I want to care for patients of all backgrounds, regardless of if they have like a different opinion or a different belief system than I do. And so that was kind of another interesting uh, application uh, and process. And I have not practiced yet. I know for a fact that that's going to be something that I have to learn through even more experience of actually like being on the field.
That's
But
huge.
it's something that like I want to strive for, and advocating for. It's not just that. It's not like I want to be um, against abortion, but I want to be like um, for the smallest lives among us, and also for the all lives. I mean, it's the mothers that are going through this, regardless what circumstances are happening to put somebody in this situation. Um, they're going through this. It's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge. Hey, really quick, I'm going to hang up on you and call you back because it's glitching out. And I've been noticing that the deeper I get into calls. So I'm going to call you back and see if that helps it.
Okay.
Well, both of us have to disconnect. There we go. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear
Sweet.
me better? Is it okay?
I think so. It just cuts out sometimes. Like there's moments I can hear the sentence, but it just starts to sound weird. But
Oh, okay.
I love that. I think that's really important as a filmmaker and as a storyteller is to recognize that there's more to a story than just our own perspective. And I think wonder ties into that, not only in the wonder of a specific hot topic, but just the wonder of everything that we think that matters to us. To be curious and to love and to wonder and to have this all with the world is so important. And I had the chance to interview somebody who's a film critic, but not necessarily a filmmaker. And he talks about how film is still magic to him and it causes him to be hungry to understand more of it. And I think if we don't approach our stories with this magic or this desire for something beautiful, not just this disdain for the thing that we hate, we miss out on the opportunity to actually tell a story that matters. And I think it's really essential in a world that everybody has an opinion and all they want to do is yell it at the top of their lungs and expect everybody to agree with them. And we become an outrage culture rather than a culture that cares about something. Even to the dissenting opinions, there is an ability that we can make everybody who agrees with us more mad. Or we can explore why the opinions that we have matter so much.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's something that I think just the more we live, we'll be confronted with those types of decisions that we have to make, and we can go in usually one of two directions. So it's just interesting to see what that ends up being, and it's a process.
And I love that. And I think it's at this point, not in any distasteful way. It's difficult to go from such a reality of a topic to, hey, what did you use on the aperture or the lenses? Because those things pale in comparison to even the idea of like, what was the difficulties on set, to this idea that I think that's really important. Where, and I mean, in just all frankness, I feel like you as a filmmaker chose to grow in this film, probably more than I've seen most filmmakers grow in their entire career, where the first film that I saw you work on, that I got to work on you with, you had an opinion and you had a process and your desire was to communicate that opinion. And I feel like your empathy has grown so much from that first film to this one. And this is a philosophical idea. Do you care about people or do you care about your principle? And if you care about both equally, or even if you care about your principle enough to the point where your desire is to explore people's hearts, then you're able to tell stories that actually matter. Again, I think that if this film was in a more public light, it would have a much more impactful full effect than the movie Unplanned. I've heard of many very kind, normal people who disagreed with the position on abortion of Unplanned, walked out of the theater laughing because they thought it was so disrespectful to not only them, but to the craft, as well as it just felt like they were doing a sermon on a Sunday. Whereas your film, in many ways, didn't even try to tell you what she did right. You could even question and say that what she did may have not been right. But it doesn't stop you from considering the possibility. And I think that's really where our worldviews start to get shaped. We're not shaped in a moment. We're shaped over thousands of moments, and which ones are willing to guide us through the long term. And I think that I've thought about your film for so much longer than I've thought about films or even huge speeches that have impacted me. I've thought about your film for much longer. It's challenged my thought processing. It's caused me to wonder. It's caused me to have conversation. And that's so much more important than even what I think is right, is my ability to help people start the process to what I think is right. And again, like, I want to say, like, this is a ridiculously sensitive issue, but I think because it's such a sensitive issue is what gives it so much value to us as filmmakers, is not to be afraid of those sensitive issues. Like, what matters to us? And I mean this into a full range of the conversation. If you're listening and you're outraged at the fact that they feel this way about abortion, that there's all of these differing views, I really encourage you to share your opinion. Please, like, even in the video, please comment like, hey, I hate this. I'd love to explore that. And I think it's your right to explore that, as well as I think that it's important for you as an opposing filmmaker to explore the topics that really matter to you in a way that empathizes with humanity. And there's ways I could go into doing that, but I think that would be digressing. But I do think that there's so many different topics that matter to us and that we've been involved in that are important. And again, the issue that we run into is somebody writes a film about abortion, and then there's the statement of, well, you have no right. You've not been through it. So why would you tell me what's right and wrong? Whereas the opposite is, if you have a strong opinion about something, please explore it, but be willing to respect the reality and explore their story, not just state what you believe is right and wrong. And I think that you've had the opportunity to conversate about your film, even publicly now. Like, you're sharing your heart and your thoughts. But for those who have watched the film, they know that you care enough to go through the process. And I think it causes your actual daily worldview to be a lot more, I don't even want to say enlightened, but a lot more empathetic and stoic and willing to be humble. And I think that those are important things whenever we're talking about such important topics. It's treated with such little respect. And I think that those things are practiced in areas where we wouldn't expect. And one of my favorite things is I think you learned more from this film than you even did, maybe even more than you did on Prone to Wander, but you were willing to take the process to dive in. And in respecting the art isn't spending necessarily 6 years on it, but sometimes it's just being willing to slow down and say, I want to know. And I want to really say this is a thing I'd like to drive home. Respecting the art doesn't mean that you spent $30,000 on this film.
You're right.
It meant that you cared enough about the topic that mattered to you to respect the art form of storytelling and the art form of filmmaking. And that mattered so much more. And again, I'd like to contrast this with your previous film. Your previous film had a very important topic to you as well as to the world. Maybe not as controversial and maybe not as important as this film. And there was so much energy and again, this isn't necessarily bad, but it's important to notice there's so much value was put into it. And I think that it showed in its cost, not necessarily its effect. And I think that there was more value internally put into this next film, and it was not shown in its cost. It was shown in its effect. And I think it's an important lesson for us to know that, like, there's a comment by many filmmakers that film was bad because it didn't have money. That film was bad because they didn't put in the time. That's complete garbage. The film is good or bad based on the amount of respect that you have for the art form, to be willing to take the time to make the calls that are needed to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you had approached that film, because you're actually a decent cinematographer, I was very, like, with much respect, I was so surprised. Like, you shot my sister's wedding, like a brilliant cinematographer. But more than that, you were willing to respect the art form to bring somebody on so that you could focus your heart and your attention somewhere else. Mind you, that was the boom pole.
Yeah.
But you still were willing to take the time to honor the craft. And I think that's a big and lost thought, is what we're doing important enough to honor it. And I think that you've trained yourself to do that, not only with the art form, but with your life. And I think that spills into the art form. You valued Prone to Wander enough and the people on that set enough to treat them with massive amounts of respect. And then you did the same thing on my film. And I think that leaked into your ability to write this story. And I think it really matured your opinion of film. And of course, that's an opinion. Like, you could say, have a differing opinion, or somebody else out there could have a differing opinion. But I strongly believe that much of the benefit and the strength of this film wasn't even in its correctness or incorrectness. I think it had more to do with the honoring and the respecting of the opinion and of the craft. And I think that really showed through. Like, today, philosophers are filmmakers. That's where we view the world. Like, today's thought processes are shaped by us, not by Kant or by professors at schools. Everybody laughs at those thoughts now, but our real worldviews are being shaped every day by the movies that we watch. And I think that philosophers were willing to honor the craft of ethics so much to shape people's hearts and minds. And today, we're given the same charge. Whether we may have the right view or not, do we respect that view enough to honor the craft?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. That's super encouraging, and that's it's helpful for me to kind of even think about, because I do, like, between these two films, Prone to Wonder and Terminate, they were, like, very different. Well, the processes were very different, but at the same time, there was a lot of similarities. And there's a lot, like, I will say, I do think I have, like, a slightly, I'll push back a little bit. Good. On the subject of Unplanned, in that, like, I kind of enjoyed that movie, and I do, like, I get, like, the differing opinions on it, but I do think that it was a story of somebody's experience, and you know, there's arguments that can be made about the execution or the you know, different aspects about it, but I think the films that we see shape I draw a lot from the films that I watch, and I know, like, that's not, like, something groundbreaking. Everybody does that, but it's something that is I like. I was listening to a podcast with Isaac Dietz, and Trevor. I've actually
Oh, yes, I need to listen to that.
Yeah, I haven't finished it, but I started listening to it, and that's something that they were talking about, is, like, kind of this idea of creation, of making things. Like, everything that we make is kind of like a copy of something. Maybe not like a direct copy, but that's the process of artistry. Is, like, you see something and then you're like, oh wow, this is really cool. What's my spin on this? And then somebody does the same to your work, and, you know, it's just this cycle. But that's what art is, and so it's like, it's just an interesting process, the filmmaking in general, and I really appreciate your encouragement of I feel like you are very intuitive, so much so that sometimes I don't even know what I'm learning, and then you tell me what I'm learning, and I'm like, oh, that is what I'm learning.
That's
So,
awesome.
um, yeah. And then in this film in particular, Terminate, it was just, I think I'll, um, I think I'll continue to, hopefully continue to learn. And even like, this was a kind of segueing into like some of the production and everything. It was really, really cool to work with the actors that we had. Mandy Corbett, Matt Wallace, and Jason Williams. It was They were a joy to work with, and especially again, like in Prone to Wonder, how Katie kind of bore the weight of the film. Mandy really bore the weight of this film.
Absolutely.
She took it incredibly seriously, and brought just a hugely deep level of emotion. Um, and I really, really am grateful for her. And then as well, I mean, Matt was played like the perfect doctor, and it was actually Chad's idea. He was like, we were trying to think about casting, and he was like, "What about Matt?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? He's like the perfect person for this role."
Yeah.
And he did it like super, super well. And then once Jason agreed to be on it, I was stoked because he's a phenomenal actor as well. And he brought like a different level, a better level than what I had in mind. And so
Yeah.
uh, it was just, it was, that was like another part of the process for me, like getting to play. And we even had some moments where we were kind of like, I don't know, it just like, kind of going back to what we talked about between the two films is like, and I still have so much to learn and I want to learn more about directing. But between Prone to Wonder, I tried to take the lessons from that and then put them into practice on this film. And it was just, it was stressful just because what I mean, even though it was like a small crew and that's like good for some reasons, it also does make things a bit more stressful. But and you know, filmmaking, as you know, is always it can always be kind of stressful. But that's part of the process,
Yeah.
and you can look back at it and learn. But yeah, it was just a really cool experience to actually kind of like play around on set in the sense of like learning to like play scenes differently than they were written and kind of be like, oh, what about like, let's try it this way and see how that works. And it was super cool to work with actors that could adapt to that and collaborate really.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think that a lot of these things, again, they influence the weight, the value, the experience of the film. And we learn. We learn from these films. Like I've told you many a times, I can't wait to be a part of the feature that you write and produce and direct. Because first of all, I'm gonna eat the best Chick-fil-A all day. No, I
It'll probably here's the process.
yeah, I
The
know.
rate that I go.
I know it'll yeah. I think that there's going to be an interesting journey to see your growth as a filmmaker because there's so many more films within like I mean maybe we'll just make a feature next. I would love that. But I think that what I'd love to see is some of these films that you make that you're just not you don't like just seeing these quick films that come out of you. And I think I've seen some of these kind of projects like even like this is the big thing I've noticed from you. I'm a filmmaker who just wants to grow as a filmmaker. I just want to make and make and do these things. But every project I've ever seen you be a part of, I think you've put your whole heart and soul into and it shows. Like the wedding film that you and I shot, you edited that and it's to this day one of the best wedding films I've ever seen edited. And I've watched a lot of wedding films. It was just an excellent film and it was an excellent story and it felt like you cared. And I think that's something that's important. It's do I care about the craft? And I can't wait to see that with the different films that you're making because every film you've made has gotten so much better. So I'm looking forward to some of these future projects that you're working on. Before I let you go, is there any last pieces of advice that you'd give to younger filmmakers? First of all, trying to build their crews and their relationships with filmmakers, as well as just overall career experience and advice as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I would say, um, I'm trying to think of, you know, some quick bits that I've learned and that I am learning. Um, I think that something that's reiterated a lot is, and Isaac is big on this, and so are so many other people, but like the fear of failure,
Yeah.
and perfectionism. Um, I think I get locked into, um, it has to be perfect and it has to be right and it has to be done right. And that kind of rigid thinking is good in some sense, because I think it can push you beyond what, it can beyond just settling, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Um, but at some point you do have to, something that I'm learning is like being okay just putting the work out there, and it's I think Mandy has actually talked about like the idea of like sharing your work, um, and um, and that's something that we had to learn, and I'm sure we can talk about this maybe at another time, but like the process of Prone to Wonder, I mean, we could still be editing that. There's always things to
Yes.
find that you could tweak just a little bit to make just a little bit better, or story elements that could be like slightly better, but at some point you just have to, one of my favorite quotes. The films that probably shaped me the most are the Lord of the Rings,
Mm.
um, and Peter Jackson, the director of it. One of the things that he says is that a film is never finished; you just run out of time. And so, kind of approaching it in that aspect, one I would say like deadlines are good, because
Yeah.
we didn't have a deadline for Prone to Wonder, and that's some of the issues why it took so long. Um, but regardless of a deadline, you can always tweak the film. But at some point, you just have to be like, you know what, um, it just needs to be done. I just need to call it and move on to the next. Like, let this have its time
Yeah.
and move on to the next project. So I don't know if that's much advice
No, that's
or just.
huge. A lot of filmmakers struggle with that. And again, I think that like, and I'm grateful for you being willing to come on and just kind of share your heart. This was a pretty sensitive topic for you to be able to share kind of some of the more raw parts of your experience as filmmaker. But I think that it's important and essential because if people don't share this part of their filmmaking journey, then everybody else isn't willing to go on that same journey. It's again, it's a more applicable sense of empathy for you. And I think that you letting people have the opportunity to be empathetic with you or even mad at you for your heart and your reasoning is a unique experience that I hope a few of you have been able to make it to the end and hear this really cool
My
story.
ram.
Yes, I love it. And again, I'm grateful for you being willing to come on. So if you were able to make it to the end, I'm going to rephrase that. I don't like the negative connotations of that wording. So if you've made it, huh?
Can I can I say something real quick
Please.
before? Yeah, what I just thought of another piece of, advice that I'm trying to. This is like filmmaking advice and life advice in general that I'm trying to enact. But it's definitely hard and it's nothing groundbreaking. But
Yeah.
also, I would say like don't like trying to be other filmmakers and try to like trying to live their experiences, or the experiences of others. I love hearing people's stories. I love hearing, um, life situations and the things that people have gone through and come out of and everything like that. But a lot of times I try to then like emulate it to the point where it's not healthy.
Yeah.
I think we obviously have mentors and even people that we read about, stories that we read about that we can like take parts and, look up to um, and try to like, learn from and everything, and that's good. But we can, I think, get trapped into where the the temptation, I guess, to like to be that person
Yeah.
and like live like their story. And I think you and I have talked about it before, and you might have even like given me this advice, but like just not like Josh's story is not my story, and my
Yeah.
story is not your story. I know I would even argue that our stories are bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And a reflection of the creator. But yeah, I would just say, like, even in listening to interviews from filmmakers and stuff like that, don't try to be that filmmaker. Take what you can from their experiences and their advice and everything like that, but you're not them, and you don't need to be them.
That's huge. That's really huge. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your heart and your passion with me. If you enjoyed the podcast, please, I'd love the opportunity for you to leave a review on the Apple Podcast app. It really helps these stories get shared with more filmmakers and more people all over the world. And if you haven't gotten the chance to, subscribe to the YouTube channel to hear more stories, as well as getting a better ability to understand how to get inspired by other indie films. And if you didn't like the podcast, or you have controversial opinions, or you didn't appreciate the approach that we took to this topic, I'd really love to hear about that. So write a negative review or leave a negative comment and share how possibly we could approach these ideas better, as well as maybe we're just wrong. I'm excited for the news stories that we're going to be hearing from different filmmakers, but more than anything, exposing ourselves to these really unique stories and building up the crews over imaginary cups of coffee is the best way that we can grow as people and as filmmakers. Thank you, guys.